possibility of forming an RFA, Regional Fire Authority. And so we'll open the meeting now at 13:31. And I can't see my picture, so hopefully you can see me. So
we can see you.
Yeah.
So what's the will? Do we have any indication of whether Scott's been delayed or whether we should just go ahead and he will join us? What's your thinking here on the Everett side?
oh, there's my picture.
So Brenda, I don't know if you know anything. I called through the computer and also texted to see if he was coming, but I haven't heard back.
Yeah, I didn't hear that he wouldn't be here, but I haven't had any conversation with him. I'd say we can go ahead and get started and he can catch up.
All righty. Is that okay with folks if we go ahead?
Yes.
Yes.
All righty. Let's do it. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Reed. I'm the facilitator for the group. Welcome to the second exploratory meeting between the City of Everett and Fire District 4. For introductions today, I would like to give the commissioners and council members and Mayor Franklin just a quick chance to introduce each other to one another a little bit more. I'm hoping you could, when you do your introductions, share with us where you were born, either what city or place, where you were when you graduated from high school, and a little bit about your professional career background. All of you have really interesting backgrounds. Either you're retired or you're still working in them. And Cassie recently came from a very different background before she became mayor as a full-time person. So I thought maybe you could share those things with one another. It's just a quick way to get introduced to each other. And then we'll go around and after the committee members, introduce all the rest of the staff by name and jurisdiction, if that would be okay. And so either anybody that wants to go first, there's bonus points for that, but they're probably not worth a lot. So if anyone wants to go ahead and start, that would be great.
I'll start first. So Jim Schmoker. So born in Seattle, raised mostly in Linwood, graduated from Meadowdale High School. Then couple years, 4 years in the Navy and in California. Married with 3 kids, 13 grandkids. This December, coming up December, this year will be our 50th wedding anniversary. And let me see, been in Snohomish since 1976, joined the fire department as a volunteer in 1981, and became commissioner January of 2008, after 26 years or so as a volunteer. And right now, for the last 36 years, I live in downtown Snohomish here, right behind the Aquatic Center.
Thank you, Commissioner Schmocker. And you ran a bunch of very interesting businesses as your career, as I recall from.
Yes, I've been involved in a couple startups, even at Microsoft. I spent 14 years at Microsoft, and that was all spent in at first as a startup, which a little program that turned into the fastest growing business in Microsoft's history to $1 billion. It's called SharePoint, which probably some of you have heard about. And then retired in 2012 from Microsoft. I was retired for 3 years. And then a friend of mine who had a business kind of pulled me out of retirement about 6 years ago. And so I've been operations manager at a shoe store for the last 6 years, 2 shoe stores, one in Lakewood and one in Everett. And I really like working, I'll tell you. I spent 3 years retired, and that was great, but I just love having a purpose. And so, which is part of why I love being part of the commission and part of the fire district.
Great. Thank you very much. Any volunteers to go next?
I'll go next.
Thanks, Evan.
All righty.
Can we identify this person? There's an attendee here with just a phone number.
That's Councilmember Bader.
That is council member. Okay.
And Peepa, I don't know if you can help him with his tech difficulties, but he did text that he called in, I believe. Councilmember Bader, is that you?
No? Councilmember Bader, are you on the call?
He's vanished from the attendees list here.
Oh, okay. Back to Commissioner Merritt. Go ahead, Evan.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
All righty. I'll start with where I was born and raised in Snohomish. I left here after high school for a few years, spent a few years down in Arizona and made my way back. I am married and I have 2 children and one due in about 4 weeks.
Wow.
So we got 2 boys and got another boy on the way. So let's see, went to high school in Snohomish, graduated in 2003. My professional career, I work as a career firefighter in the surrounding area, surfer, so the outlying areas from Snohomish. And then let's see, I've also own a construction home building business that I build both custom and spec homes. So see, I've been a commissioner for just a little over a year now, and that's about it.
That sounds like a lot, though.
It's a lot.
Especially with child number 3 on the way. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Who would like to go next?
I'll go next.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah, my name's Richard Flath, and I was born in Portland, Oregon. Went to Wilson High School in Portland, which is no longer Wilson. The name got changed. Anyway, and so I'm a Lutheran minister, and my wife and I, we've been married a little over 50 years. We have 4 children, 5 grandchildren. I spent 37 years connected with the military, either on active duty or in the National Guard or Army Reserve. And so we've lived here in Snohomish for 10 years less than Jim, if you can do the math. So anyway, but I was elected to 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, as fire commissioner. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Flapp. Over to the Everett side. And Scott, if your camera is on, that would be great. I can't tell, but I see you are there. Can you hear us? There he is.
Here we are. Are we good? Yeah, sorry. Ever since my office got Teams, I've had a heck of a time getting on Teams for Everett. Scott Bader, Everett City Council. Been on the council about 8 years. And what else can I tell you? I live in Riverside, and just happy to be able to sign in. Thanks.
And what kind of work do you do, Councilmember Bader? Can you share that with them?
Sorry, yeah, I work for the Catholic Archdiocese of Seattle. I help parishes manage their finances.
Thank you. All righty. Cassie or Brenda?
I'll go. I'm Brenda Stone Cipher. So I was born and graduated both in the same town, which is Everett. I went to Cascade High School. I am my education and training is I have an MBA in finance and accounting, and I'm a CPA. And so I've done basically about over 30 years of nonprofit leadership work. And for the past few years, I have been running my own consulting business, and I do mostly financial consulting, strategic financial consulting, and leadership and governance work for nonprofit organizations.
Thank you. Mayor.
I will go. I'm Mayor Cassie Franklin. I was born in Twin Falls, Idaho, raised in Eugene, Oregon, and I have been living and working in beautiful Everett, Washington since 2004. Or I've been working here. I actually didn't move here until a little later, and was elected to council in 2017 and have been serving as mayor since 2018. So I was on the council 2 years and then mayor. Is that right, Brenda? I was council 2 years and then I've been mayor. This is my 4th year. My 4th year as mayor. Before becoming mayor, I was the CEO of Cocoon House, an organization serving homeless and at-risk youth. So my background's in housing and homelessness. I went to grad school in Munich, Germany, and studied psychology there. And I have a beautiful daughter and a lot of pets. So I won't say how many.
Okay. That's great. Thank you all very much. Let's maybe run down each side of the house for the staff who are here on either side. Your name, title, and agency. We'll start with the chiefs, whichever side wants to go first.
Chief Waller, Fire District 4.
All right. Who else is online from District 4 today? No one?
Nobody listening.
Nobody listening?
Oh,
I'll go. Sorry. Whitney Mansfield, president of Local 2694.
Thank you. Anyone else on working at District 4 with us here today?
I don't think anybody that can speak back.
Okay.
Everybody else is just watching.
Just watching. Okay. Well, hello out there in watching land. Let's go down the Everett side. Go ahead, Dave.
Dave DeMarco, Everett Fire. Hi, everybody.
Who else from Everett here? Go ahead.
Rich Llewellyn from Everett Fire, Assistant Chief.
Thanks, Rich.
Mike Calvert, Assistant Chief, Everett Fire.
Thanks, Mike.
Curtis Brown, Fire Marshal, Everett Fire.
Mike. Who else we got from the city of Everett or Everett Fire on the line?
Paul Gagnon. I'll do a little introduction because I wasn't here at the last meeting. Paul Gagnon. I'm the union president for the Everett Firefighters Union since 2010. Been with the city of Everett for just coming up 25 years, and I'm a division chief assigned to our training division. And that's it.
Great. Good to see you, Paul. Anyone else online here? Pippa? Anyone? Okay.
Matt Mueller, administrative assistant, been with the city 10 years, fire department for 5.
Thanks, Matt. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you for that. I think it's good for everybody to at least get a little bit of a chance to know each other, as hard as this is through a remote setting. I'm going to just talk briefly about the agenda, and we'll move then to try to approve the meeting summary today. We're going to do a little bit of process stuff. I would normally start these meetings and these efforts with a lot more process stuff, but since we're in an exploratory phase, I think most of that can be deferred until the point that we get out of here. But I think there may be some good value in anticipating some of the rules of the road if we do decide to move forward beyond the exploratory phase. So we're going to talk a little bit about the draft charter that I would want to have you all consider and talk through. But you don't need to act on it today. You don't even need to act on it this month. And I expect it will change before it's finalized. And then we're going to dive back into the substantive stuff in response to the request last time that we look a little bit more, what are your options in terms of designing a governance structure or a finance structure? I'm going to talk through that at a high level today. It won't be the first or the last time you see that information, but we'll try to go there and you can maybe comment to each other about what you're particularly interested in or if any aspects of that are particularly unattractive. Then the chiefs are going to share with us their thoughts about why this merger into an RFA makes sense from an operational standpoint and what challenges they see along the way. We'll do our roundtable at the end, which will include all the committee members, and we'll also ask our labor representatives if they have any comments to share with us at the end. So that's the plan for today. Any questions or comments? Okay, we'll keep going. So the first thing I'm looking for today is approval of the meeting summary, which is starting at page 2 of your packet. It's short. We try to not do a verbatim meeting summary, just sort of capture the topics of discussion and the comments coming from the committee members. And so if folks had questions or corrections to this, I would happily take them now. And if there are none, I would be looking for a motion to approve. If you're concerned about this format or if you would like things to look different, we can certainly do that. This is just sort of a relatively informal but hopefully helpful recap of what happened. And we'll ask you to approve these as we go forward. Any questions or comments or corrections on this? Anyone want to move that we approve these?
Scott Bader, I'll move.
Thank you, Scott.
Point of clarification, District 4 has to approve them officially, so they have to, the motion has to be from a District 4 and a second from the District 4 and a separate vote by just those 3 we can do it together, but as long as we have the motion and the second recorded who ours is, that will work.
Okay,
So I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
thank you.
And I'll second that motion.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
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 And then, so now I guess the idea, we'll ask the Everett folks if you all are okay with the meeting minutes as well.
Yes.
Either thumbs up or an aye. Thumbs, I'm seeing thumbs. Okay, we have a meeting summary. This will be posted. And I think our general theory is that it would be, a copy of this would be, I love getting photo bombed by somebody's cat. That's lovely.
Sorry.
No, it's perfect. It makes me happy.
That's
We will send these, or somebody, Chief DeMarco can forward these meeting summary minutes to the city council members who are not watching this discussion, as a really quick way for them to stay up to speed on what we're up to, unless you guys would like to take a different tack over at Everett. But that's probably the simplest way and most timely way for them to stay up to date in case they're not watching the meeting summary. Does that sound like a plan on the Everett side? Council President, Councilman Bader? Okay, we'll do that then. Thank you. So now I'm going to go to the discussion of the charter. So we talked a little bit about process last time. We looked at the mission summary, mission statement. We approved some ground rules. And if you look in your binders behind the Roles and Rules tab, right behind said mission statement and ground rules, you will see a draft charter. It's pretty simple. It's a whopping 5 pages long. We're not approving it today, but I wanted to take a couple of minutes to walk through it at a high level and answer any questions you might have. And I think what I'm just looking for in terms of direction today is a sense, after I walk through this, about whether you would like to approve it in this exploratory phase, which would mean probably approving it next week. And if we did that, we would then also, I think, want to approve a chair and a vice chair as part of that approval. But we don't need to do that in this exploratory phase. We can totally wait till the next time. Again, I just wanted to cover this quickly so you have a sense of how I would normally see the process working if we proceed. Any questions before I start? Okay, so on page, I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly. Page 1, you'll see the mission statement that we've seen before. Section 2 there, desired goals and outcomes. They're sort of high-level policy goals. They're both substantive and procedural, that we would say, this is sort of a high-level way of saying, yeah, we're sort of focused in the same direction here. We want sort of the same things out of this effort. This would be something you'd want to take a look at, and maybe there's some of them in here you don't like or you would like to revise, but this is a starter set for consideration. Moving on to page 2, there's 3 votes from each side. We don't have alternates in this process. Once we get past the exploratory phase, I anticipate we'll dial back the frequency of meetings to somewhere in the vicinity of twice a month. And we will go until we complete an RFA plan. And the earliest we'd probably get to the ballot is conceivable you could go in May of next year, but probably looking at August of next year for a ballot measure if we all reach the end of this process in concurrence. This committee, again, is advisory to the City Council and to the Board of Commissioners. So as we go along and you make recommendations on this should be included in the plan and this should be included in the plan, we'll forward that on for consideration by your council. Just check in with them and this Board of Commissioners separately, although I know you all are here today and you will be at all these meetings. But in case there's like, yeah, we don't like that recommendation, they can let us know. We can try to bring both sides into alignment at this table and send something back to them. Or if we hit the point where there's just an impasse or people do not want to continue the discussion, that's okay. Just and either side can let the other side know, I think we're at impasse, or I think that we're no longer interested in continuing this conversation, and then we can conclude the work of the planning committee, should that happen. Now I'm on page 3. Again, our meetings will not have an opportunity for public input. Both of the websites are up. Thank you to the staff. And there is a email on both of the websites where anyone that's interested or curious about something can submit a question or comment, and we'll be tracking that website for traffic and reporting back out to you. But somewhere along the line, we will do at least 2 rounds of public input on the plan. We'll set up special open house meetings or something else where we can hear from the community about the proposed plan as it is being developed. And that's sort of the general plan for public input at this point. In terms of the committee itself, I would usually propose that there be a chair and a vice chair, and that would be your choice of who those folks are. It won't be a time-consuming role. I just try to meet with those folks in advance of each meeting, at least on the phone, to confirm the agenda for the next meeting. And if they're sensing anything they'd like a redirect or revisit, we can get that feedback from them, which is really helpful to making sure we're on track with what you guys need. Section 8 of the charter talks about advance notice of meetings and the agenda and the materials. And we may end up, hopefully we'll all eventually get our shots and everything will be cool and we can meet together in person. But until then, we're sort of in virtual format until you all decide otherwise. And a quorum has to consist of a quorum of the District 4 commissioners. So 2 of them must be present for them to have a meeting. And so we're calling a quorum for this. 2 members from each side is a quorum out of the 6. On decision making, I've started out proposing a consensus at the smallest level possible. You could certainly raise it. The idea trying to be just, we know what we want to consider a consensus and what it takes to make a decision. And a decision could happen that is not a consensus, but we want to know consensus when we see it. So I've suggested, at least for starters, 2 and 2 from each side would be consensus. You could raise that to unanimous is required for us to call a decision a consensus decision or recommendation, or you could say 5, but a minimum you'd want to get 2 and 2 from each side. And if you couldn't get that, but you had a 3-to-1 vote and you really needed to keep going, you could make a recommendation on a 3-to-1 vote. I'm sorry, 3 folks from one side, one vote from the other. But we would always let the city council and the board of commissioners know if we're forwarding a recommendation, we'll be letting them know this is a consensus recommendation, or we didn't hit consensus on this, but here's where we are. Here were the disparate opinions that we had about it. What do you think? Let us know. The final RFA plan when we send it on at the end of the process would have to be approved by whatever consensus vote you decide to define, which is usually why I don't encourage folks to have a unanimous consent required as consensus, because I'd like to try to avoid situations where any one person can stop the process from proceeding. So I would recommend you keep your consensus level at either 5 or 4 votes, and that a consensus be required to approve the final plan. Staff are going to be supporting you. And then finally, if you want to make changes to the charter after it's approved at any point, that's fine. That can happen. And I propose just 2 votes on either side to do that. So that's quick. It's a pretty straightforward process. I've used documents like this in a lot of other processes, and I find it usually works pretty well. Are there any, again, I'm not asking for folks to approve this today, but I would like to know, A, if there's any significant questions or concerns. And then B, do you want to act on this in this exploratory phase or defer to the next phase? Go ahead, Mayor Franklin.
I think deferring the chair and vice chair to the next phase makes perfect sense. I think the chiefs, we all rely on the chiefs to kind of lead this effort for us. That makes perfect sense to me. Around the consensus issue, I just had a question. 4 would be concerning for me if it meant 1 from one jurisdiction and 3 from the other, because that is nowhere near concessions. So to me, it would only be, okay, if it's 2 and 2, that's different. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure and clarify so I understood. Thank you.
You could take action with 3 and 1, but it wouldn't be considered consensus unless it was at least 2 and 2. At least that's the starting. Okay, any other questions or thoughts about this? I'm seeing some head nodding on let's defer action on this until the next phase. Folks comfortable with that? Okay, all right.
On the bottom of page 2, it's mentioned that all 3 legislative bodies are we just, that was before the other dropped down, is that right? Or do we have something?
I think there should only be 2. So if I got a 3 in there, yep, that should say 2.
Or both, or something like that.
Thank
perhaps.
You.
Okay.
Good. Anything else? All right. Well, let's keep going then. I think now I'm going to ask Chief DeMarco if he could pop up this PowerPoint that's in your packet then behind the meeting summary. And this is in response to the question for, can we at least explore at a high level what our options are around governance and finance is the focus. Chief will talk about operations a little bit more today, and we're doing a deeper dive on that next week. Next slide, please. So we're just going to talk about the basic rules of the road and a little bit of comparative review for both governance and finance. Next slide, please. So the governance is, of course, it's basically talking about how are you going to set up your board, your oversight board, and the basic issues, as you might anticipate, how many of you are there, how do they get to the table, how long are they there for, does the board stay the same as it is set up initially, or does it transition over time, and if so, how? Do you want to anticipate what might happen if other agencies sought to annex into the RFA once it's created? The biggest, I mean, the RFA statute is incredibly flexible, and you will see if you look through the other materials that I included in the packet that nobody has set up their governance board in the exact same way. So it's not like there's a one best practice here. It's really what works for you. I would say at the end of the day, there's like 5 things to remember. 1, it's very flexible. 2, everybody does something a little different. 3, you can change the structure over time. And in fact, the RFA board itself, if you reserve this power to yourself, can change the governance structure of the RFA by a simple majority vote as you go forward in time. And then finally, there are a handful of rules of the road that we will need to be mindful of as you do proceed. And I'm going to talk about those next. That's the next slide, please. Okay, here they are. So initially, at least, all your board members, well, actually, generally, all your board members have to be elected officials from a member jurisdiction, or they must be directly elected by the voters in the RFA. For the initial board that would be in place on day 1 of the RFA, the board has to be composed of some configuration of elected officials from the city and the district. That doesn't need to be in place forever, but that is the way you need to start. You can change it once you've had an opportunity to have a directly elected member, and that would be every 2 years. In the odd years, you have commissioner elections, and that would be the first point at which you could transition the structure away from all elected officials of the current 2 participating jurisdictions. There isn't a size limit on how many folks you can have at the table, but there's a practical limit. You don't want a board that's so huge that it's unwieldy to have a conversation and make decisions. Terms have to be staggered, no more than 6 years. They just can't all end at once. So you don't get into a position of having the entire board leave at once. You sort of phase them in and out, and at least election-wise as you go. You may think about the 1 person, 1 vote principle can come into play on these boards in terms of roughly equal representation per seat if you are in a place where a majority of the board is considered to be elected. And that's either they're directly elected by the voters of the RFA, or there is no discretion in their appointment because they are a person of a title that we all know the mayor is the mayor. If the mayor is appointed to the committee, she's considered an elected member because there's no discretion. And some attorneys I've worked with are tougher on how to interpret this than others, but so we won't wrap ourselves around the axle on this one today, but as we go forward and look at configurations, if this becomes an issue, we'll make sure that we have some legal advice weighing in. Finally, the last one, you can hold 2 different elected positions. You could run directly for a RFA commissioner, and you could run to remain a commissioner of the fire district should we do a structure that involved that. You just can't be on the ballot for 2 elected offices at the same election. And so that comes to play when people start thinking about terms and staggering things to maximize the opportunity for people to stay on the RFA board and do whatever the heck else it is they're doing as an elected official. Next slide, please. At the end of the day, it sort of boils down to some configuration of these 3 things. Some number of elected officials from the member agencies. Some number, could be 0, could be a lot more, of people directly elected at large, some number of folks directly elected by district. And you can mix and match those up however you want. You don't need to have all three. You can all go all one. You could do 2 or 3, whatever you want. I think it's interesting, if you haven't run into this before, how the districted RFA positions are selected. Then the primary, only the people living in the district get to vote. And then the top 2 of those come out and they're voted on by everybody in the entire RFA. It's sort of an interesting structure. And if you go to directly elected districts, they must cover the entire RFA, and then regardless of the number, and they must be roughly equal in size. All right. The next slide shows some examples. I just pulled from the 4 RFAs that we have, the RFA plans in the back of your binders. And you can see right here, everybody did something different between these 4. And it's kind of interesting. I think some of it, 3 of these, their governance structure has evolved since the first one that they had put in place. One of them, the Renton plan, the structure they put in place at the very beginning has not changed. But everybody else has sort of transitioned over time, and I think that's sort of interesting. So just in brief, the North County RFA was originally formed by 2 fire districts in the North Snohomish County area. Those 2 districts subsequently went back to their voters and said, we've given our entire job over to this RFA. We would like to be dissolved. And then the board of directors will be directly elected by you and we'll just be gone. Our units of government will be gone and you'll just have the one RFA to replace us. So they did that. They currently have 6 members. When Arlington joins, they will add 3 members to their board, 3 council members, actually 2 council members, and the mayor from Arlington will join. And then they have a sort of a loose transition path over the next 4 years or so, where they will hope to eventually decrease the size of their board by vacancies and end up at a place of 5 districts and 2 at large. The Puget Sound RFA started with 3 elected officials from Kent and 3 elected officials from Fire District 37. Those are the 2 forming jurisdictions. And then they gave a non-voting seat to the city of Covington, which had previously annexed into District 37. They subsequently had SeaTac annex in, and they gave SeaTac 1 non-voting seat, and they've also given 1 to Fire District 43 at a later date. This is their initial configuration. Renton is the one that hasn't changed. Renton's merged a fire district and the city. The fire district was much, 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 much smaller than the city population. But the board that they set up initially was 3 and 3. 3 commissioners, all 3 commissioners from the fire district, and 3 city council members to be picked by the city council from time to time. That is a situation where it does raise that sort of 1 person, 1 vote issue, because half of those folks are considered elected. So if not, yeah, the commissioners. South County RFA, whom you are familiar with, your neighbors to the south and west. Initially, all 5 District 1 commissioners and 2 elected members from the Everett Linwood Council came together to be their starting governance board. And then that has transitioned to 5 districted positions and 2 at-large positions. Okay, I think that's all I want to say about that. And then the next slide refers to the matrix that is in the packet. I'm not sure if it's going to be on screen or not, but there's a matrix in your packet that has, it's with orange, and it shows all 13 RFAs in the state, and it shares with you what their governance structure is. And if you take a few minutes and scan it, you'll see that everybody's done something different. A lot of them have transitioned from where they started over time. So it's sort of food for thought about how you guys could set up something that works for you. And I'm not going to go over that today, but I wanted you to have that information. And if you are interested in just sort of brainstorming about that for yourself or with your peers, that's a resource for you. I'm going to stop there. Are there questions at this point or burning comments? Is this making sense? Is this remotely helpful to flesh out some of your options here? Hopefully. Okay. So then let's move down to the next subject, which is finance. And there's sort of two buckets of things to think about. One is, what do you do right after the RFA has been established, but your tax levies haven't kicked in? That's usually a period of less than a year. And just so you know, so at that point, the RFA is usually funded by the remaining fire budgets from the participating agency. The funds are sent over to support the RFA until the levies for the RFA kick in. And then on an ongoing basis, you have another series of options, which basically are the same as that which a fire district has, with some minor exceptions about some special levies, different authorizations between a fire district and an RFA. So the next slide sort of maps these out at a really basic level. And here they are. So you have two taxes: the fire levy tax, the EMS levy tax, property tax, possibility for a benefit charge, and you also, of course, can charge fees for service. So the fire levy, the maximum rate is $1.50, and the EMS levy, the maximum rate is 50 cents. So at the very most, you would charge $2 per thousand. I'm not covering all the sort of minor tweaks on inflation-adjusted levies and 6-year, 10-year permanent. I'm leaving that to another day, but there are iterations of those levies. So the third column there, the benefit charge, it's not a tax, it's a fee. It's based on risk, which typically divides types of buildings into different categories by size and use, and assigns a risk factor to them. And people pay more or less depending on if their structure is associated with more or less risk. And if you decide to implement a benefit charge, it will always require a 60% vote for a start, not a 50% like the fire levy and the EMS levies, which you already have, so you can take advantage of that for a 50% reauthorization. So if you're including a benefit charge, at least for starters, you're going to need that 60%, and your fire levy must be reduced to no more than $1. So in exchange for having the benefit charge, which is a very inflation-resistant financing mechanism, you can basically say, oh, our property tax collections are going to go way down next year. We can capture that loss by increasing the amount of our benefit charge a little bit. So you can ensure very stable funding for your fire service with a benefit charge and a property tax mix. But again, you need that 60% start. And if you get the benefit charge, you got to drop your fire levy to no more than $1. So what have other folks done? Let's go to the next slide, perhaps. Oh, sorry, I forgot. This a little bit more on benefit charges. The maximum amount of dollars you can collect in any year from a benefit charge is 60% of your operating budget, so excluding capital, but your operating budget. And as I think I mentioned before, it's a fee based on risk, and more risky structures usually pay more. So what usually ends up happening is that single family residences are considered low risk, and they're usually in a less expensive category than, say, for example, a large commercial or industrial structure. They would pay more because the fire department's got to have more specialized equipment and personnel on standby to serve them. And that's sort of the equity argument underlying the benefit charge. And you would, if you decided you wanted to do a benefit charge, you would need to agree on what are the classifications of property by risk, small, medium, and large commercial, industrial, small residential, larger whatever it is. And then you would assign sort of a cost factor to each of those classifications of property. And what ends up happening typically is if you have a highly urbanized development pattern that has a lot of different types of use, as opposed to just sort of single family homes and very small businesses, if you've got a lot of really different things going on, what the benefit charge does is it basically shifts costs away from single family residences to larger commercial and industrial and multifamily residences. The exemptions that you see on the property tax for like public housing doesn't pay some of the property taxes. They also don't pay benefit charges. Similar for low income housing does not pay. Religious institutions do not pay. So some of those property tax exemptions that you're used to seeing, those come over in a benefit charge environment. Okay, next slide. So here is what the folks that the 4 examples that we have in the back have done. North County RFA, they have a really not a highly urbanized development pattern. It's mostly agricultural and lower density development. So they don't have a benefit charge. They have a fire levy and they have an EMS levy. Now, Puget Sound and Renton, you'll see they have a fire levy. They both have a fire levy. They don't have an EMS levy because King County has imposed a countywide levy and they share in the proceeds from that. And if your county has done that, you can't have your own. But that's not the case up here. Puget Sound RFA began their life with a benefit charge, so they needed to get that 60% approval from voters going in. And Renton did the same thing. They said, we know it's a bigger threshold, but we really want this benefit charge given our development pattern. We got a lot of big industrial stuff here in Renton. That makes sense to us. South County RFA did something different. They started with the fire levy and the EMS levy, but they decided to hold off on the benefit charge because they didn't want to risk whether or not they'd get that 60% vote. So they started with just fire and EMS, and then they went back to their voters in a few years, in fact, it was just last fall, and said, would you like to approve a benefit charge for us that would work in this particular way? And the voters said yes. So that's what other folks have done. I'm just going to stop and see if there's questions on anything there or comments that anybody wants to make.
So, yeah, so if my understanding, which may or may not be true, of the benefit charge is if we add that to the proposal along with forming the RFA, then we need a higher percentage of approval than if we form the RFA and then go for the benefit charge later. How does that work?
That is exactly right. If you create the RFA without the benefit charge, you will only need a 50% plus 1 approval. If you include a benefit charge, you will need that 60% approval at the get-go.
But if we want to do the benefit charge later, we still need 60%. Is that correct?
For the benefit charge, you would need 60%, but you could create the RFA with just 50% plus 1. Okay, good questions. Any other questions?
Are there agencies out there that help us figure out what we should be charging for the benefit for, big buildings, small buildings? Are there things to help us do that?
Yes, there are. There's the fire districts have sort of coordinated together, and there's a sort of a standard formula about risk. And there's you can look easily at the different classifications that others have set up in terms of property, single family, mobile home, small commercial, large conduit. So you can see what other folks have done. You can just adopt their classifications, and you can see what kind of a risk factor they've assigned to them, and you can do the math, and folks can run all that in a million different model ways for you. But the formula is pretty standard, and you need to use data that you can obtain. So for example, you have to be able to, the assessor has to be able to sort your properties into the various classifications. They can do that here. They charge you $20,000, $30,000 a year, I think, to sort the properties into categories for you so that you can impose the fee on somebody knowing credibly, yes, you are a small commercial establishment versus a medium-sized commercial establishment. So you need to have data that you can actually get in your formula. So for example, in King County, they have a more robust set of data available to them around things like, oh boy, I don't know. Some of it is uses and some of it is like commercial gas and stuff. And they're commercial gas factories, super high risk, right? Let's go blow something up. Let's go there and blow it up. So that would be a super high risk facility. We don't necessarily have that data available to us. So that's the one caveat. But yes, there are folks that have looked at this, and you can look at models side by side, and the assessor has now done this for a couple different agencies here in Snohomish County. So they're used to it. We won't be a matter of first impression. And yes, we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. So the last slide I wanted to just share was around the facilities, apparatus, and equipment. So if you could roll forward to slide 12, there you go. So what happens to that stuff? You all have a bunch of stations, you have a bunch of fire trucks and things and equipment, PPE, all the rest of it. People do different things. Here's some of the options here sort of mapped out that people use. I think the policy approach that most folks that I have worked with have taken is the taxpayers already paid for this once. So when we transfer it over, we shouldn't make the RFA buy it from us. So that's, now other folks have taken a different tack, but the folks that I have worked with have usually taken that tack. There are always variations. For example, in South County, urban public parcels are hard to buy, and if you've got one, you might not want to let it go. So for example, the city of Linwood told the RFA, you can have our fire station here on this parcel. We'll just give it to you. But if you ever stop using it as a fire station, we are taking it back because that could have a lot of value to us, and we originally bought it. Obviously, in the case of District 4, where you've got 2 of the 4 stations that are co-owned with the city of Snohomish, that fact remains in place, and we'll be working with that. We can't just run over the rights of the city. That's not a thing. You might have slightly different arrangement for those stations because of a pre-existing contract that would remain in place. So sort of logical options and what folks typically do. And that is all I wanted to share on the sort of options scan at a high level. Again, this won't be the last time we talk about this information, but hopefully it gives you a sense that there are a lot of different things you could do here, especially around governance. Really a lot of flexibility there. So I'll ask at this point, before I turn it over to the chiefs, were there any additional questions or comments? Anything you saw in here in your options you're like, oh, I hope we never do that, or this looks pretty interesting, we should check this out? Anything that struck you as you were hearing this options that you want to share about, or it's all just like, yeah, well, we'll come back to that because yeah, and we will come back to it. So anything? Did that help in terms of sharing the options? Sort of, you have a lot of flex there. So, okay. Well, that's all I had on that. And now I get to stop talking, yay. And we will turn it over to the chiefs, and they will go over the next presentation, which is sort of on the benefits and challenges of bringing these 2 operations together. And gentlemen, I'm not sure which of you is going first or running the PowerPoint, but I cede the floor.
Thanks, Karen. Let me get this running back up again. Both Chief Waller and I have gone back and forth on this. This is only just a couple of slides, and it's a very, very high level overview of what we sort of perceive as benefits for both organizations and challenges that the process might face. I think it's worth pointing out that there are some benefits that are common to both jurisdictions, and then there are some benefits that are unique to each jurisdiction, and this is, again, just a very high level overview of those things. So what you're looking at here is the stuff in gold. The first are sort of what we perceive to be combined benefits to both organizations, and then the individual ones in color down below. And I'm just very briefly going to touch on some of these, and then Chief Waller, please feel free to jump in as we go if you see something that I missed. First of all, there's a variety of ways, and I don't want to go into the fine details here, but there's a variety of ways that that both organizations and the communities that we serve would see improved service delivery and resiliency. And there's lots of examples of that, which is listed below as an improved size of the labor pool. Just having a larger labor pool to draw from would provide a bunch of different benefits to both jurisdictions, because we could do better staffing models, better planning for hiring replacements, and so on. And it, almost hand in hand with that is the next line, is improved operational efficiency, because when you have a larger pool of resources to draw from, you can then build a network of services that accesses those resources and distribute them in a way that meets the demand of the communities that you serve. Both District 4 and Everett fire reach outside of our organizations for information technology services, for human resources. Everett does manage its own fleet, but we get support from the City Motor Vehicles Department. And we reach out outside of our organization for payroll service. In an RFA environment, we would bring all of those services inside. And from the City of Everett's perspective, we do draw a great benefit from sharing these resources with other city departments, but at the same time, as simple as it sounds to run a fire department, just for example, on the information technology side, there is a profound amount of technology that drives behind the scenes, the emergency services that are delivered in the community. And having that specialized skill set in-house would have a dramatic impact on our community, and I believe for District 4 as well. Certainly the combination of the two administrative teams would create, 1 + 1 certainly equals 2, but when you're combining forces of effort, it is not a simple 1 + 1 formula for how effective the team is. It is really the growth of capability is on a logarithmic scale. And if you remember my example of the difference between 2 and 3 fleet mechanics, 2 fleet mechanics versus 3 don't just do 3 times the work, they do 3 times the work plus some. 3 mechanics are able to do vastly more work than 2 mechanics plus 1, if that makes any sense. It's an exponential growth in capability. Certainly Snohomish County, the last gold line there, certainly Snohomish County over the next 50 years will continue to regionalize. And the question is, how will those puzzle pieces sort of build themselves, and how will they interconnect over the next 50 years? We can look south to California for examples. California is much further along in this process than Snohomish County is or Washington State is. But how we choose to collaborate and join with our neighbors now will define how many voices our communities have in the next round of mergers and consolidations that will occur hopefully long after I've left the fire service. This is more than enough just for me. And then the individual things, certainly District 4 has expressed an interest in access to some of the capabilities in our fire marshal's office. They've expressed an interest in having a dedicated public information officer and a dedicated infection control officer 24/7 in the form of a medical services officer. For Everett, both providing sustainable funding for not just the fire and EMS service that our department delivers, but the bank capacity and the ability to choose what, if any, additional services the city wants to retain as if we were to separate from city government. This is an opportunity and a big piece of the puzzle that the city works on in terms of structural deficit. I talked a little bit about the improved labor pool, and in Everett's case, we're also interested in diversifying the departments. Snohomish has been more successful than we have in diversifying their organization, and honestly, we're envious of that and would like to take advantage of some of that. And then, we have a replacement plan at Everett for vehicles and that kind of thing, but we do not have a capital replacement plan for things like fire stations. Some of the larger scale capital items that we own, planning for that, unfortunately, due to the structural deficit that we work with, has been deferred. And then certainly, that's the rosy side. There will also be challenges, and as with all things that involve, new relationships and communities that put a lot of value on the services that we provide, we'll have to sort of work through some of these challenges. Both communities are very, very proud of their fire departments. Both governing bodies have expressed publicly and privately a desire to have a community fire department. And honestly, both organizations are proud to be community fire departments. We think when our groups get together and talk in advance of these meetings, we think that the model that fits best in this scenario is not found in other fire service agencies in Snohomish County, but the model we look at, honestly, and this was Chief Waller's words, the Snohomish County Sheriff provides an example of, they are a county-wide service, but they provide, for example, a chief officer in the city of Monroe. And Monroe feels like they have, and their cars are marked Monroe Police Department, even though they're managed by the sheriff. And so one of the ways that we could sort of work our way through this is to create a concept where we are merging the administrative teams, but the Snohomish fire trucks can still say Snohomish, the Everett fire trucks can still say Everett, but in the background they're supported by a merged administrative team and all of the efficiencies that we had talked about in the previous slide. We've talked a lot about informally about culture. There's a lot of great things about both organizations. It's really neat to see the historic perspective that's on display in Snohomish. We have the exact same pride in our history in Everett. And there's great things about the Everett Fire Department, and there are great things about Fire District 4. And what we need to do is sort of develop a process about how to extract the very best of both organizations, while leaving some of the things that need to be left in the past behind. And a way that we could do that is in the next line, and that is going through a values process for a combined organization. And Everett Fire has done this, and we've drawn great value from it. Certainly, we would want to touch every member of both organizations and sort of find out what is most important to them, what is worth preserving, and what things do they see as needing to be left behind. So I see that more as an opportunity than a challenge, but it'll be a fair amount of work. The labor groups and the labor agreement that they work under is absolutely not insurmountable, but both organizations, both labor unions take pride in the work that they do and the labor agreements that they have, and they would have to find common ground on how to negotiate and form one union. Certainly, my own experience with this is one of the challenges of this process is for the elected officials to recognize that they have an obligation to provide this service, and that they have to find an equitable form of governance and be willing to share some of that authority. That is what lies at the heart of this conversation, that the commissioners in this call and that the elected representatives from Everett all have to realize that to gain some of the efficiencies described in a fire authority, that some sense of control as you sort of give birth to this organization, that you have to be willing to let some portion of that feeling go. And then, having served myself on a board that was formed by commissioners and city council people, I can tell you with certainty that whatever board of governance you choose to form will eventually, and in fairly short order, realize that their only purpose is to provide great service to the community, and that a citizen or a community in Snohomish or a citizen or a neighborhood in Everett would receive the same consideration from the full board, regardless of what jurisdiction the home member is elected from. And then the last two things that will be hard to help the community understand, because when you look at a map of this and you say, why would Everett and Snohomish consider a consolidation? The map, you have to cross the trestle, and if the fire engines are used up in Snohomish, how are we going to get fire engines from Everett? And the important thing for the community to understand is that in Snohomish County already, geography has become largely irrelevant when it comes to operations. We already have the mutual and automatic aid agreements in place. We already have the digital GPS locations of all the fire resources in Snohomish County, and that regardless of whose name is painted on the side of the fire truck, if you have an emergency, you are going to get the closest appropriate unit, regardless of who is managing the payroll and the replacement of equipment and whatnot. And then also the last item I have listed as a challenge there is understanding a finance model that involves a benefits charge, because it's complicated. As Karen presented just a few minutes ago, it's not so complicated that it can't be understood, because clearly it's been passed in other communities, but the community needs a good education platform to understand that in a benefits charge environment that typically the cost of providing the service is reduced on a single family homeowner and shifted in the direction of the types of buildings and occupancies that actually demand the services that we provide. And in an environment where Everett and Snohomish are contemplating this, where Everett is the largely urbanized partner, there is more than enough urbanized environment here to produce revenue that benefits both jurisdictions in that scenario. So I will stop talking. That is the last slide that I have, but those are some of the things that we perceive. And I want to turn the floor over to Dawn and just see if there's any, if you'd like me to go back, Dawn, let me know, or if you have anything you'd like to add. Well, you're still muted.
Thank you. See, that's why we work well together. No, I think we've been talking about these since our very first meeting. It feels like a year ago, maybe it was 6 months ago. So I think we're both pretty well on the same page with all of those.
Any questions for Don or I? Again, we recognize that there's an enormous amount of fine detail that is not a part of these slides, but while we're in this exploratory phase, we just wanted to talk about some very, very broad strokes about what may be benefits and what may be challenges, and really hoping at the end of this 5 meetings that we will go back and deliberate and choose to explore these in great detail. That is really the goal that we're working towards. So thank you for your time.
Now I think Karen's muted.
Yeah.
My turn to be muted. This happens to somebody on every call, right? So now's the opportunity for y'all to sort of think about, well, what did you hear today? Do you have any takeaways that are sort of significant for you in terms of benefits, challenges, and the range of options? And so I'm thinking as we go into this sort of roundtable here, where we'll hear from each of you, as well as the labor reps, I'm hoping if there are any takeaways you had today that you think are really noteworthy and helpful for you as you think about this project. And then the second thing, which might be helpful, is if there are any questions that you want, that this brought to mind, that you want to be sure we further explore in this exploratory phase, because we can adjust these last 3 agendas to come in this phase to meet your needs. In terms of things you want to have a chance to talk through and think about or discuss with one another before we ask you if you would like to proceed beyond the exploratory phase. So again, on this roundtable, I'm hoping any takeaways from what you heard today and any questions that it brought up for you that you would like to be sure we bring forward in the next 3 meetings or part of the next 3 meetings. So that's sort of what I'm looking for from you, and then we'll go to the labor folks after that. So thinking, anybody that wants to go?
I'll jump in there since nobody else is. So I think one of my takeaways was, and we've discussed this kind of behind the scenes, is the model that the sheriffs use. And I think some form of that, not directly what they use, but some form of that can greatly enhance the maintaining the cultures, as well as sharing resources. I think the sharing resources is one of the big things for me, both manpower and job functions and equipment. Not so much equipment, but mostly job function and manpower. And so I'm encouraged that that was brought up. The governance thing, I think we'll need to figure that out. I don't think that's going to be insurmountable. Looking at some of the models that the other RFAs have used, I think we can figure something out that'll work. And Chief DeMarco's comment about future mergers, I hadn't thought of in quite that way, but it does enhance both our positions in any future regionalization mergers.
Great, thank you. Who would like to comment next here? Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think I'd be curious for more data on how successful achieving that 60% mark and bringing those benefits charges to the voters has been, and whether it's success when it's formed or success after a subsequent vote. So that'd be a big chunk of information that would be very useful for my decision.
So how many folks sought one right from the get-go, versus later, and how many, what's been the track record on those elections generally? Okay, we'll see what we can come up with there.
Yeah, I have kind of the same question, and that is a similar question anyway. That is, how many RFA votes, either with or without the benefit charge at the get-go, how many of those were successful versus how many failed the first time around?
Okay. So whether they failed with or without, just how many RFA votes have been successful regardless? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I hope the fire folks authority have all that data somewhere, or it'll be big, a few telephone calls. Okay. But those are good questions. Okay.
Yeah, I've not seen any of press. I mean, I haven't, just studied this thing over the years, but from what I've seen, almost all of them have passed.
Mm-hmm.
So.
They have been remarkably successful.
And if you think about it, it has to get through both of your boards before it goes to the ballot. So I think that's been the thing that's made it successful. I can't think of one that's failed, but there might be one or two out there.
We will scour around and see what we come up with. Good questions.
Yeah, so this Cassie, I think the fire benefit charge is really intriguing, I believe, for the city of Everett, just because it's the only way that I think I can see that it not increasing the cost to our residents substantially, is if that cost is shared with the drivers of the service. And so that is a very attractive option. I know it's harder to achieve. And so the data that Commissioner Schmocker, and is it Schmocker or Schmoker? Schmocker?
Smoke.
It's Schmoker.
Schmoker. Commissioner Schmoker and Councilmember Bader asked I think are very important questions for that, because it is, I think it's probably pretty central to Everett. And yeah, and I don't want to get ahead of where we need to be, because I don't want to talk about governance just yet, but I do think I was interested to see how quickly they moved their governance structures. And so I do kind of want to understand that. It seems strange to form a governance structure and then suddenly, nope, we're no longer going to have 3 council members and 3 commissioners. Now we're going to do this other thing. And so I kind of want to understand what drove those actions, but it doesn't necessarily need to happen in these first few meetings. It's just something I noted for sure. And I would be curious to learn a little bit more about District 4 and the resources that you have. Like right now, Everett Fire, as Chief DeMarco shared, utilizes, and I see it as all as one. I know Chief DeMarco sees Everett Fire separate, but it's just part of the city department. So utilizes city HR, city IT, city services. And if those already exist in District 4, how many, what's the ratio there? And so what are the resources that are already in place for those types of supportive functions that are run in our program outside of the department? So.
Okay. Great. Who would like to go next?
Well, one of the questions I have just has to do with the transfer of the stations, for example. And I'm wondering, is it required that the property be transferred? Could the city retain the property and, give a free lease or $1 a year lease? And
yes, you could. Yes.
Okay. I think just from a legal perspective, that would accomplish the same thing, but would not require as much legal work.
I think that's probably, although you could argue either way. You could argue that since that was city money that paid for that, but it was city money that was collected to pay for the fire department, you could argue either way. But I kind of like the model of, as long as it's a fire station, we get to use it. And if we decide not to use it for a fire station, then give the land back to the city. I could certainly get on board with that.
I agree.
Yeah.
Can I just pipe up there? The only difference when we're looking at Fire District 4, let's say, the RFA will in essence own that property, and it'll be an asset to the RFA. So we're we're giving it to you because there's nobody to get the land back from. And so we would be giving our assets to the RFA in perpetuity, but the city, if they did a lease, is not. So where's that coming together of saying, if we're going to give up all of our stuff, then why does the city get to retain all theirs? Just throwing that out there. Having been talking all these in these talks and other agencies, this is almost always the biggest sticking point is assets. And I just like to, I always go back to it was the citizens that bought it, and let's just make sure we do that and treat all the citizens fairly, and then we win. However you guys decide to do that, but that's the important part.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. It's not for us to keep it. I just thought it would be easier, but I get your point. And as long as it would come back to us, if you stopped using it for fire services, I'm perfectly fine with that.
All right, Commissioner Merritt, thoughts?
I don't have a whole lot of questions or thoughts. It's just a lot of great information.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Flapp.
Well, you folks answered my question there about the benefit charge and examples around and how that would get that kind of information. For that. Other than that, I really didn't have anything else, except I had a comment on at least, or maybe it's just me, but oftentimes some of the speakers just cut out. I don't know if anybody else had that problem, or maybe it's just me. But like when you were talking, Karen, you'd cut out for a while. When Chief DeMarco was talking, he cut out, at least on my end here. I don't know if it's just my equipment here. I don't know if anybody else had that problem.
I haven't had any problems yet.
I was able to hear Chief DeMarco. I'm sorry for that problem for you, Commissioner. Maybe we can try to work on that before the next meeting.
Yeah, we'll have to get Bill.
Okay, I'll ask the chiefs and then labor folks. Chiefs, anything you want to add at this point on the roundtable here?
I don't have anything. Don, do you?
No, I spoke up before, so I'll defer this time.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. So then I'd ask if either Whitney or Paul would like to make any comments or observations here today.
I'll start so Whitney can correct me at some point. I think there was a lot of great information that you gave, Karen, and the chiefs. I think what I got out of this, what grounded me, was that we're not the first. There's many have done this before, and so no matter how many hurdles we see might be before us, I think that they're all very manageable. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Whitney.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think the governance and the finance portion of this are huge as far as the messaging that we'll do to the community to try to get this election passed, if that is what we decide to do at the end. So I'm excited to see how you all develop that, and because I think these two portions are the biggest things that have to do with whether or not it's going to be a benefit to the communities or not.
Yeah, the people tend to care a lot about those pieces of the message, for sure. Anyone else here want to add anything before we head out? The next meeting is going to theoretically focus on labor and staffing issues. So we can perhaps take up, I think, Mayor Franklin's issue about learning a little more about the administrative structure in District 4 and over in the Everett department, and some of the similarities and differences between how the labor contracts go. We won't try to just kill you with details, but just to sort of walk through those at a little bit at a more deeper level. And that's the focus for the meeting next Friday. Unless anybody wants to add, suggest we add something else. We will also try to follow up on how many people have asked for this and been told no, and the who started with a benefit charge and who deferred. We will try to figure all that out between now and then as well. Okie doke. I think that does it for today. If anybody wants to, do we need a formal adjourn motion from District 4?
Yeah, I'll move that we adjourn.
You are on mute, sir.
Oh, I am?
No, you're
No.
good, Richard.
It was me. I was on mute. I was mute. It was a moot point. Officially, we don't need a motion to end the meeting, but since Commissioner Flath made the motion, I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So we'll end our special meeting at 14:46 hours.
All right, and that's it. It's good to see you all again. We will see you all again on Friday the 16th at 1:30. Thank you all very much. And if questions occur in the meantime, email the chiefs or myself, and we will do whatever we can to respond.